Welcome to this month's passenger profile with taxi member Marco Iannello coming to me live from Manchester, UK. Welcome, Marco. How are you?
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm quite okay, thank you. I hope you're okay. And you look okay. So yeah,
I'm good, thank you for asking. I appreciate you doing this at dinner time for you, and
yeah. Well, nearly yes, but
I,
it's okay. I mentioned that to my boss, and she was all right with that. I got permission.
me
I'm
too.
safe.
Well, let's get started. So you were born in Rome, Italy. I can hear the accent, but your English is really good. You were worried about your accent, but you're very understandable, so don't worry.
I know. I've been trying for ages to rid of my thick Italian accent. Even when I was living in Sweden, people there would yeah tell me, "Oh yeah, you sound so charming. Your Italian accent is so charming," even when speaking Swedish. But I suppose I have just to accept it and embrace it. Although I'm still really trying really hard to,
I would say
and
that
now I've got this very funny and peculiar Mancunian and Northern English accent.
I
Yeah,
would say if there's one accent that is popular everywhere in the world, it's Italian. Every woman hears a man speaking Italian. It's like, oh, every man hears a
well,
lady speaking with an Italian accent. It's a very romantic sounding accent.
yeah, we might as well say it's a me.
So you started out playing piano, two
Yeah,
fingers, and you were just a kid, and you eventually graduated to all 10 fingers, which I'm glad to
exactly.
hear.
Yes,
So
eventually.
I'm assuming that keyboards are your main instrument.
Yeah, yeah. Eventually, I transitioned from piano to keyboards, and I still play them, not in a band as I used to. But yeah, of course, right now, even for doing the music I make, I do use a MIDI keyboard. Of course, it's a digital piano with 88 more or less weighted keys
Uh-huh.
because I really love the feeling of of the at least quasi real piano feeling. That's what I'm used to.
Oh, I
But I also play lots of synthesizers with synth action keys, which they feel like butter, really. You just sync your keys. If you're a pianist, you know what I mean.
I'm not, but having worked in the studio for many years, yes, I clearly I acknowledge the difference between weighted
Yeah,
keys that feel like a real piano and
exactly.
regular keyboard keys that just. Phew, I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I was really intrigued with, I'm going to get to that in a second, actually, but I also noticed that you've got a degree in information technology and
That's
programming
right.
is how you earn your living with your day job. And I've got to tell you, it's always shocking to me in kind of a little bit of a humorous way that when I interview members for these passenger profiles, how many of the taxi members are programmers. There must be some connection between programming and creating music.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, when you make software, like I do as a software engineer, you're actually engaging your creative cells in your brain. You have to make creative decisions as well. It's a problem-solving thing, really.
Yeah.
Even music is a problem-solving thing in a sense, isn't it? So you really are engaging your creative side of your brain alongside, the more like business side or administrative side, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, yeah, you really need to be a creative person. One really needs to be able to, yeah,
I'm
have
actually
knowledge.
gonna talk about problem solving in regards to music in a minute, but
Yeah,
I've got to take note of the fact that you were the keyboardist for Manchester-based steampunk symphonic metal band. I've never heard of such a thing. Can you please explain that to myself and our viewers?
yeah. I'm sure you may be familiar with symphonic metal and bands like Nightwish, or there was one from Russia, Kona, or more recently one called Imperial Age, where symphonic they usually incorporate orchestral elements in the music. So you got your bunch of heavy guitar riffs, heavy bass riffs, heavy drums, but also with lots of orchestral elements or keyboard elements as well. The steampunk thing was very, very different because in the case of a Clockwork Opera, the founding member was actually very much into the steampunk thing. And it got me very, very interested to the point that I didn't become a steampunk person. Like, they all dress up with costumes. They look really, really beautiful and nice. But I became interested in the subject, and I made my research. And then when I joined the band, the steampunk element was in the way we were dressed on stage. For example, like with Victorian looking
Wow.
attires. Yeah, yeah. I had to buy, a waistcoat and other things. I even went on stage with a top hat and a cane. So it looked really fun. But yeah, the steampunk elements in the band were really the lyrics and the look of the
Yeah.
band, mostly the lyrics, because the music was very much, yeah, not very hard or heavy metal. There was quite a bit, metal, of course, but lots of keyboard works of different sorts. It could range from, orchestral stuff to more like pirate folk-like thing up to electronic stuff. It was a very, very like a big cauldron of different influences, if you will. It was
Hmm.
very, very lovely. I really enjoyed it. And I came to know before the band ceased its activity that actually we were invited by other bands in Europe to play. And that shocked me because eventually, when I eventually learned that, I thought, wow, imagine that we were already quite popular here in the Manchester area. We also traveled the UK a couple of times to do mini tours. But going to Europe from this island, the main continent, that would be like graduating, really, becoming like a proper band, if you will.
Yeah.
But it never happened, unfortunately, because eventually we found out that the guitarist was quite scared of leaving its home territory and embarking to you know this kind of journey, which really was looking really big to us. Being a local band, you get invited to play in Europe. You think, wow, that's big. It's like going across the pond playing the United States, for example, or vice versa. Some United
Yeah.
States local bands, like, they get invited to play in Europe or Asia or wherever, really.
It's a good thing that none of the Beatles had that same problem. They would not
Yeah,
be the Beatles. They'd still be
exactly.
playing in the Cavern Club. Um,
Yeah.
and then, so that band dissolved, and you decided to focus on pursuing a music career for film.
Yeah.
And a couple of years after going solo, you discovered the world of library music. How did you discover the world of library music? Because it used to be that there were maybe 10 or 20 really active composers in the world, and there were, I don't know, maybe 10 music libraries. There wasn't
Yeah.
the proliferation that there is now. How
Yeah.
did you discover it?
Yeah, I think I've heard it mentioned or actually read it online. Some other composer peer I knew, I'm in different groups online, and somebody was mentioning this. Oh, I got my music used in this TV show or in this program or in here and there. So, oh, okay. I already knew, of course, shows were using music, but I always thought, oh, there must be somebody that they hired just specifically to do the
Right.
music for the show, which of course happens. But then, right now, I think, at that point in time, I thought, okay, so this is a thing. I wasn't really sure about that. And it was a nice discovery for me. And I thought, okay, let me see what I should do or what I could do to be able to get my foot in the door. And I started, talking with people, and, they would say, "Oh, yeah, we do this, I do this, I do that." Eventually, I came across taxi, of course, because I think everybody who gets an interest in library music, or wanted to become a composer for sync on the side or as the main gig, I think
Right.
taxi appears out of nowhere. I believe that.
Good. The marketing is
Um,
working.
yeah, exactly. And of course, I'm not going to lie. I really want to be honest and truthful, 100%. And I was reading lots of negative comments about it. And you're very familiar with that. Everybody that has come across taxi is very familiar with that. And it took me a while. I mean, I really wanted to do. I really did my research. So I was even talking to people about them, and most people say, "No, no, don't join it. It's just a scam, pay to play, blah blah blah." The usual things. But eventually, I decided, look, I've got nothing to lose really, apart probably a lot of money, but that's another thing. So I decided to join. It was I think 2018 or
Okay.
2009, no, 2019 actually, 1st of January to 31st of December 2018. It was a very specific date. I still remember it. Uh, yeah, I think my first couple of years, I got, initially didn't get much traction with forwards, mostly returns, of course, as everybody or nearly everybody usually experiences, because, I didn't really know how to approach this.
So that made you think that we were in fact a scam because you weren't getting forwards automatically from the
Yeah,
beginning?
well, I didn't really. I felt disappointed though. That is true. I did feel disappointed. Now, whether I was disappointed in myself or not, I really cannot remember. But there were some forwards along the way, and that actually that what kept me going and keep submitting. But I think I made my mistakes. Of course, I've learned my lessons.
And what
And
were some of the mistakes that you made early on? Because I'm sure that they're
like
common.
I did submit to listing with all the pieces of music that I had sitting on my computer. They were not really made to the brief.
Hmm.
And again, I think everybody does that in one way or another. I mean, after all, even Matt Vanderbilt did that. We know that very well. He loves to tell the
Yeah.
story.
Yep.
So I did that, and also like expecting that, okay, I wrote this piece, this is perfect for the brief, and then of course the screener pointed out, no, look, this thing it's not really in tune with what the brief is asking for, and this thing too. So why not? And it would make me upset, of course, because it's human nature after all. But then eventually, you let it sink a little bit, you reflect upon it, and then you think, yeah, okay, the screener is right. Perhaps in some instances, I really, even after a few days, I still didn't really agree with some screeners. But again, it's part of the game. They're human beings as well. That is something I realized a few years afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, but even those returns, really, I wasn't really realizing it, but they would make me improve in some way. They were making me better as a composer, as a musician, even as a business person, because as we all know, this is a business. You need to treat it like a business. It's not a hobby. If you do it for a hobby, yeah, fair enough. It's okay. But if
Right.
you want to be really, if you want to get there, wherever you want to go, you really need to treat it like a business, as anything. You're
Yeah.
a consultant in a way. In a way, you
My father always said, if you treat it like a hobby, it'll pay you like a hobby.
exactly. Yes.
So it's good, very adult of you, very mature of you to eventually let the feedback sink in,
Yeah.
and and then you started getting more for how you know what? How often were you submitting in the early stages?
Uh, I was submitting to listings that now I can't give you an exact figure, but like if I saw a listing that I thought and listening to the reference, I can do this, or I can try and do it. I was already honest with myself, like even if it was a genre that I really didn't know, I thought, okay, this is a good occasion, like to learn something new, for example.
Hmm.
I remember that happened with a listing for Urban Dramedy, which I didn't submit to. That's an interesting story. If we have time, I might expand upon it. Although I think I made a post on it about like 1 or 2 years ago. But yeah, and eventually I learned how to do Urban Dramedy because of that listing. So yeah, it was very educational. Each listing in the end is very educational, even if you already know how to do the genre. But there is still perhaps something in the listing that makes you think a little bit in the references. So why are they picking these references? Why is the client picking the references? Why is Taxi deciding to use these references? You know what I mean? So
It's probably the most difficult part of our job and the library
yeah,
owner's job is to pick references that nobody, it's extremely rare that somebody wants something that sounds just like a reference. And it's more like listen to all three of these references and look for commonalities. And can you create a piece of music that would go on a playlist with them versus make something that sounds like that? So it's just yesterday or on Monday's Taxi TV, I had a library owner on, and he complimented Tom Stillwagon, our head of A&R, to
yeah,
say
I
that,
watched that.
yeah, and the library owner said, Tom calls me up and says, your references don't really match what you've described
Yeah,
genre-wise, what you need. So
yeah,
it's not perfect. It will never be
yeah,
perfect, and all we can do is try
exactly.
hard to make it as close as humanly possible.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, even since I rejoined this year, it's not like I've gotten much more forwards than before. I still
Interesting.
get returns. I think it's normal because I think it's all like in the moment of that listing. When you submit to it, you think, okay, I think I'm on brief with this.
Yeah.
But then the screen points something out. You may agree or disagree with them. And then again, as we say, you let it sink, probably you realize, okay, yeah, they may be right here. But then again, I think it's all in the fine details that you don't really see, in the subtext of the references or the description or something else. There's something there that actually, if you spot it, I think then you strike gold, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
what's really difficult to get right.
some newer members have commented, geez, if I'm sticking to the brief and writing to all these details in the listing, it doesn't feel very creative. I feel like I'm building something with an erector set. And then eventually they say, actually, it is creative. Have you gone through that same metamorphosis where you now understand that you can still be very creative with
Yeah.
a target and a roadmap?
Yeah. I mean, for example, in terms of creativity, I use a lot of the my own custom sounds that I have made myself, which I think that's much as most creative as you can get, right?
And are you talking about developing a synthesizer sound? Or are you talking about taking samples
Yeah,
of,
or even like sampling a noise, that
right?
might not sound like anything, but then you manipulate, you process it, you do lots of things to it. And it just I remember, was it 2 years ago when I was visiting my family for Christmas in Rome, I decided to record my mom's cat. So I,
Did
I
you
recorded
have to
like
get
a
a work for
few,
hire?
yeah, yeah, probably some tune or some, wet food, and I made a few patches, manipulated the audio, the meows and purrs and stuff, and it came out. I know, I also made my sounds available for free online, and many people have downloaded them, and they say, "Oh, this is perfect for what I need to do now."
It's great.
So yeah, I like to share what I do, and yeah, again, I've had a few library tracks that with my own custom sounds that have been used and placed.
Wow. That's great. I mean, honestly, yeah, I'm not a composer. I'm a
Yeah,
retired engineer producer, but if I were to ever become a composer, I think that would be the part that would be most fun for me would be found sounds, a teaspoon hitting a
yeah,
table, paper
yeah.
plate, whatever, and then manipulating those sounds. That is a great way to instill
But
creativity.
even as an engineer, you may as well have done something like in the studio, like I want to apply this effect to this like vocal.
Yeah,
That's also manipulating sound, creating a new sound. If you think, for example, when Queen recorded Bohemian Rhapsody, they did something that was groundbreaking.
yeah.
Imagine that. That is proper sound design. I mean, if that is not sound design, I don't know what sound design is then.
It's funny. I've got a 16 track or a 24 track digitally Bohemian Rhapsody on my laptop. And during the lockdown, two or three times I tried to remix it. There's
Yeah,
so much stuff crammed into those tracks. It's like you'll have a vocal on the track for 30 seconds and then a bass part comes in. It's like
yeah,
uh, really, really confusing. I could without bragging, I can mix pretty well, and I've found that so challenging. I could not have done that record, so hats off to them. How did you learn the difference between writing and producing music that was for records or for online distribution versus writing specifically for sync? Because a lot of people just starting out think, I just have to make great music. And somebody in the industry will hear it and go, oh, I love this so much. I'm going to put this in my TV show. But as you now know, it's a different set of rules. Same fingers, same gear, but different set of rules. How did you cross that chasm?
Well, I mean, eventually I realized that if there is a brief, there is a reason for that to exist. I mean, if I write my own music, it's just I'm doing it for myself. And if people enjoy it, then that's added value. But but even in that case, I'm giving myself my own brief. So I'm still writing to a brief anyway, even when I do my own music,
Uh-huh.
although it may be a bit more relaxed, in terms of constraints and,
Right.
requirements.
Right. Or
Like, for
change
example, I
modifying the
recently,
brief as you go.
yeah, exactly. It's many more liberties.
Yeah.
um, whereas, as opposed to, a brief that comes from a client that we need this, and it needs to be on point.
Yeah.
And then you learn how to do certain things. Like, again, we go back to the educational side of writing music for sync, where you learn lots of stuff, not from the composing perspective, like what an edit point is. I didn't know what there was, what a stinger is, what a button ending is, yeah, what the ABA structure is, what the AAA structure is.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things, that you need to consider when writing for sync, or for music libraries. It's totally different. I mean, you could do the same for yourself if you wanted to, and even unknowingly. But at the end, when you're working for somebody else, they give you a set of instructions. Even when I do music for films, like I've scored a number of short films as well, and the director wants, oh, for this scene, I want this, this, and this. That's a brief
Yeah.
within its constraints. You may break the rules, of course, if it works, and if the director gets like, oh, this is incredible, I didn't think of it. But again, I think that's a different word again. In library music, it needs really to be constrained within the confines of what brief they give you. There seems
Have
to
you
be,
found
there
it?
can be wiggle room, there may be a bit of room for moving around, but I feel like it's a bit more constrained, as I was saying, rather than like working with the director, or again working for yourself. That's the least amount of constraints, of course. But
I would think that doing scoring films again is different than creating cues because when you're scoring films, you're working the picture, so you can
yeah,
write the music so that it changes the tempo of the picture, the
yeah,
tempo of the music changes with it, the emotion changes within a scene. Whereas writing for libraries, they want one thing. It's one emotion, one
yeah,
tempo, one motif, start
exactly.
to finish, and then they edit it to use it how they need it. Was
Correct.
that hard for you to learn that difference?
Uh, it did feel like that, initially,
Yeah.
because when I started with library music, I had already scored a few short films, so it was. I didn't feel like it was less creative to add more constraints. Actually, eventually I learned that the less you have, the more creative you become, which
Hmm.
is incredible. You would think, oh, well, I can have so much, but then if you have too much, you really get lost into it and you don't know what to do anymore. Whereas when you like a limited palette of sounds, for example, that really stretches your mind to a point that you would never think you would reach. Or like when they say we want this brief to be exactly like, I know lately there is a company that runs listings through you and they request exactly one motif throughout, not even ABAs, so the same motif
Right.
repeated along the whole queue. That's a big limitation for somebody.
Right. Yeah, and it comes down to really understanding library music as a broad genre that
Yeah,
while compositionally you have to stay on one motif start to finish, you can make it
yeah,
more interesting by introducing layers of sounds, building it up, tearing it down.
exactly.
Have you found as many of our members who are either becoming successful or are very successful? Almost all of them tell us that their simplest cues with the least amount of movement and least amount of complexity are the ones that tend to get used most often. Have you seen that as well?
Yes, particularly an album of urban dramatic use I did in 2022, I believe, which was considered by the library to be really sparse, and they added very useful because of that.
Uh-huh.
So they felt like the minimalism of those cues really lent the cues themselves to be used. And in fact, they've been plastered all over the place in many
Great.
different shows. And see, that's a demonstration of what you just said. Less is more, really.
Yeah.
You One can't deny it. It's really true. Less it is really more.
Is it challenging as a composer to restrain yourself and keep that constantly in your mind as you're composing and producing that less is more? Because again, one of my father's a brilliant piece of advice was just because you can doesn't mean you should. And yes,
Yeah,
you can always think, oh, an extra layer of strings, or let me add this sound or that sound. And then it gets too thick to have
yeah,
dialogue work with it or a voiceover work with it.
yeah.
So that too is a form of limitation. But people like Matt Hurt, who was one of our very first, most successful members,
I've yet to meet him. It
he's a
would be very interesting meeting him.
he's a great guy. He's
I
inspired
think so.
so many members. He was really kind of the shot heard around the world where everybody else went, if he can do it, because he seems like a nice regular guy, and even by his own admission, he's not like massively talented. He understands the genre, and his talent is writing for the
Yeah,
genre. So I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right. He told me and has repeated the story to me over the years that the cue that makes him the most money is a very stupidly simple little cue that he wrote that didn't do anything for quite some time, and all of a sudden now it kind of averages like $9,000 a year in revenue. Uh,
yeah,
so give me some examples. You told me I'm going through my notes really quickly now.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
you've had stuff on BBC, ABC, Bravo, VH1, MTV, ITV, which I'm assuming is Italian TV.
no, ITV is here in the UK.
Oh, okay.
Is the second, most
Okay.
famous channel after the BBC.
And I should have looked at the title Top Guns inside the RAF. I'm pretty sure Italy doesn't have the RAF. I'm pretty sure that's the UK. You're right.
Yeah, that
So,
was quite surprising, really. Also because one of my friends here in the UK is a retired RAF person turned a writer. So he writes novels now, of course, with a very um, military aircraft background, because
yeah.
that's his life. And I remember, so he likes to hear the music I do. And very often I send my music to him because he's a word person, which I'm not. And he gives me lots of title suggestions.
Oh, cool.
So he's very useful in many ways. But yeah, I mean that was funny, and I remember saying he was watching the particular episode where my music was used. Actually, two episodes, but of course he didn't know when I mentioned it. He was he said, I'm surprised, but not surprised at all that they decided to use your music there." And in fact, talking about simplicity, continuing the subject, it was a very simple, sparse drone with Middle Eastern influences
Uh-huh.
that I did with this Hong Kong guy who was living here in Manchester for a while. So we decided to team up together. I asked him, would you like to do some drone synthesizery stuff? And I added, Middle Eastern instrumentation on top of it. We did that. We did a few pieces like that, and they get used. They are really simple. They don't do anything. They just set the tone. They just they are brooding in the background, but it really they really carry the visuals on themselves.
Well, that's another one of those bridges that new composers need to understand is that in the music library world and in the sync world, it's often the case that it's not that the music is the star. The music is rarely the star,
Yeah.
but its purpose in life is to support an emotion or to make the action seem more intense.
Yeah.
Um,
But that depends, I believe, because there are in many cases, like in films, you may have a film that is not really great, and then the music actually elevates it a lot.
yeah,
Yeah. So in that case, the music really needs to becomes the star of the show, if you will. And also when you have scenes without dialogue, and the
yeah.
music really is there to deliver the emotion and the vibe, then if you as a composer you write a piece for that scene without dialogue, and you really take the scene to the highest point possible, then you know that you've done a really great job. So in that case, the music really needs to be the star of the show.
When you sit down to compose and you're working on a particular brief, a particular style, let's stick with urban dramedy just because you've mentioned it a few times before.
Yeah.
Do you ever try and imagine as you're writing a scene where urban dramedy would be used, a bunch of bad guys in a car out, late at night going to raid a house to steal their drugs or commit some sort of crime? Do you ever see the scene in your head as you're writing and think, would this work for that? Or do you not imagine a scene?
Usually I don't. It may happen, and if it happens, it's not that much detailed anyway.
Okay.
I might have some ideas in my head, like how the music should sound, how the piece should sound, or what it should do, but I don't really imagine scenes. And I know that this thing has been, mentioned a few times, like a suggestion, like if you grab a picture of the internet and you look at that picture or image, and you let that inspire you to write something, as you just mentioned, like for an emotional urban tension piece, for example, where you have, these people, drug dealers, for example, being really dodgy and, doing their shady business.
Your
That
English
works,
is
of
so
course.
good, by the way, being really dodgy and on point. Some of the phrases you've used, congratulations on really mastering English.
Yeah, well, I've been studying English since I was in elementary school in Italy, which was really, really uncommon at the time.
Yeah,
And it was the subject I performed best in. So I suppose that's it.
good.
But I
Oh,
really love learning languages.
it paid off.
Right now I'm studying Korean again.
Wow.
Yeah, because my boss is Korean, my
Okay.
boss here. And fortunately now she's providing assistance, when I speak to her, and my conversational skills have been improving. So yeah, I really find languages fascinating, in terms of, again, it's a creative endeavor again. But
So,
also for me, it's when I write music, for example, another thing I really love doing in music is what I like now to call traditional music from different countries. Particularly, I love doing Middle Eastern music, East Asian music like Japan, China, and Korea. But also, I did recently a collaboration album for French music for the upcoming Olympic Games,
right.
and I think that's my main the main thing the best thing type of music I do. And because I find it that when you do something from a different country, it really makes you understand the culture of the country as well. Because you start researching,
Hmm.
like for a language, you learn about the words, the expressions they use, which can be absolutely totally different from your own native language, of course. And the music is the same. Like when I do Indian music, the Indian music doesn't have the concept of scales as we have in the Western world. We have like minor scale, major scale. They have a totally different concept there, to the point that in Indian music the tonality does not exist basically.
I've never even noticed that or thought about it. That's interesting.
For us, to make us Western people understand, they usually write the scales in the key of C. Let's say they always start on C,
Hmm.
but it may not be the case because the instruments are tuned differently as well. You know, in Middle Eastern music, for example, you got lot of microtones, and in Indian music, you have all those and, quick variations. And then again, you go to the Far East, like Japan. They, they also call it's a journey. It's a very interesting educational journey. You become a better person as well, as a result, because you get more and more into their culture. You're learning new things, and if you're open-minded, that's just you. It enriches you so much.
I think that's very smart that you're going for indigenous music from different places.
I like
Matt
the
Hurt,
word
who I
indigenous.
mentioned a minute ago, has built a career on that, and there's a business strategy involved in creating music for media, and his strategy was while everybody else is zigging, I'm going to zag. So while
Yeah,
everybody else is creating kind of standard hip hop cues. Matt Hurt would create Asian music or Indian music or whatever, and he would do the process that you've explained. And
yeah,
while
correct.
it doesn't get used every day, when there is a need for it, there aren't that many people who have done it
Yeah,
well. So yours has a
indeed.
greater chance of getting picked.
And in fact, I really like to blend traditional music with more like non-traditional stuff. Like,
Yeah.
for example, you mentioned hip hop like a moment ago. I remember one day I know this guy from near London here. He's a R&B singer songwriter. He's really great, and I met him. I remember a few years ago when I was still with my steampunk metal band, and we had this gig together. And he was a drummer at the time. He still plays drums, but now he's turned into a fully fledged R&B singer songwriter. I said, "Hey, would you like to do this little project with me?" And we did 10 Asian hip hop tunes that I actually sent to a library owner that who you know very well.
Okay.
He lives in two different places. I'm not going to mention which ones are, for obvious reasons. And he loved the idea. He ended up taking 8 tunes out of those 10 we made and eventually released a very large album.
Hmm.
But, that's one thing I also love to do, coming up with ideas that are very much left of center and suggest them to the library owners I work with, because particularly this one, he he loves to do things that are not your run of the mill music, like
Right.
your usual urban dramedy stuff, your drone, catfish like blah blah blah, you name it. So he was really happy when I suggested, yeah, would you be interested in this? And yeah, I've not seen actually any usage, at least according to TuneSat and my PRO yet. As you said, it may not be as popular, but I actually then seen many, many more composers that actually going the route, like putting together more traditional stuff with
More modern
non-traditional
sounds
stuff.
or an approach. Yeah.